Hello, my name's Adam Conrod. We have a pretty good sized Canada flag here behind me, so just bear with it because I couldn't fit all of it in. The topic on Parliament Hill came up a few months ago. Should Native Indigenous language be Canada's third language? You know what my response to that is? Why don't we make the Native Indigenous people's language Canada's first language? Because Canada is actually their country. This country of Canada doesn't belong to us, the people who grew up and was raised in Canada. Canada was originally owned by the Native Indigenous people. Canada was a country that was stolen from them by force, by Great Britain. Canada's original name was not Canada, it was Canada. And for here, from Parliament Hill, have the debate, should Native Indigenous language be Canada's third language? That to me is an insult. The Native Indigenous people's language should be Canada's first language. Canada is their country. The Native Indigenous people is the very backbone to our great country of Canada. In my opinion, I think the Prime Minister should apologize to the Native Indigenous people for even having that discussion if it come up. The Native Indigenous language should be Canada's first language because Canada is their country. I understand that a lot of politicians have a hard time respecting the voice of the people. My member of Parliament is Daryl Sampson, currently is Daryl Sampson for the time being. And me and Daryl Sampson had a discussion with his assistant in his office in Fall River, Nova Scotia, had a problem when people like myself spoke up, brought our concerns to our member of Parliament, and when we challenged the Canadian government on various topics. And because of his assistant challenging our concerns, it led to our member of Parliament having a discussion with his assistant. My concern was, should this person be in his office when he can't respect the voice of the people because they're different from the governments of Canada? Canada is one of the best countries in the world. Canada is the strongest country in North America. Canada is the best country in the world, and you can't go wrong with Canada. A lot of things ain't perfect, but it's a lot better than what's going on in the world around us. The Native Indigenous people are the very backbone of our great nation of Canada. When you look at their living conditions, what they live in, just listen to the topics they had. They live in communities where the water quality is polluted. They live in deplorable housing projects. They don't deserve to live in these conditions. They deserve to live in the best of conditions because Canada is their country. Canada belongs to the Native Indigenous people originally. And it's unfortunate that what happened way back then had happened. But I believe that our Member of Parliament all across Canada and our Prime Minister of Canada needs to do a better job of representing the Native Indigenous people. A lot better. I mean, if it wasn't for the Native Indigenous people, Canada wouldn't be the great country that it is. Canada is a great, brave, prosperous country to live in. You look at when they protest, they stand for everything right in Canada. They want to have the pipeline go across Canada. The Native Indigenous people challenge it. Why? Because this pipeline goes through lakes, it goes through swamps, it goes through our woods, it destroys everything. The Native Indigenous people stand up for everything right in Canada. And they correct their government. Not that our government listens all the time, but they stand for everything great in our country. The Native Indigenous people deserves an apology from our Canadian government. I stand by our Native Indigenous people quite strongly. And I welcome them in this country of Canada because it's theirs. No, the Native Indigenous people do not deserve to take a back seat to anybody in this country. Canada is their country, like it or not. When you look at what's wrong in Canada when it comes to Native Indigenous people, and when you look at the entire region of Canada, our elected members of Parliament, let's look at this for a second. People like Peter Stauffer gets elected to Parliament Hill. Mike Savage gets elected to Parliament Hill. The NDP leader, the current one, I can't even pronounce his name, he gets elected to Parliament Hill. These people who get elected the Parliament Hill are not even Canadian. Peter Stauffer, born in Holland. Mike Savage, born overseas, I believe it's from Ireland. And this NDP leader over in Israel, whatever. They know nothing about being Canadian. Nothing at all. They don't even know the Canada's heritage, what it stands for. And when you look at people like Peter Stauffer, Mike Savage, may the list go on, it's bad enough that they're not from our country of Canada, but they don't know what it's like to be Canadian. They bring their beliefs from overseas, from their country, wherever they're in, they bring it into Canada and they pollute our country's heritage. They know nothing about the heritage of Canada. Canada is the best country in the world, and it's the most beautiful country in the world, and you can't go wrong. You go down to the United States, their lakes are polluted, their environment's polluted, their air quality is polluted. They get crime, they get drug dealers, they get rapists, they got everything down there. Canada, we look after everybody. We don't leave people left behind. We got health care that looks after mostly everybody. I mean, Nova Scotia's health care is in bad shape. We don't even have any family doctors for most Nova Scotians, and I'd like to have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau look on that issue with Canada's health care. Why is Nova Scotia falling behind, which he's not doing actively? But when you look at these members of Parliament, when you get people like Mike Savage, Peter Stauffer, and the list go on, who are not even Canadian, this is why the Native Indigenous people's heritage is left behind and forgotten. You never heard them talk about them at all. In fact, you never even heard of them speak about it at all. And one of the great things that I've seen happen was when you see Mike Savage get voted out of Parliament Hill. Peter Stauffer voted out. The NDP leader, that terrorist, the guy with the turban on his head, he's going to get voted out. And the NDP actually think that they're going to get elected with a terrorist running their party. They actually believe that. But above all, Canada is the most beautiful country in the world. And if it wasn't for the Native Indigenous people starting out Canada, the most beautiful country in the world, Canada wouldn't be the great country that it is today. So I ask you, before you show your ignorance, if you member of Parliament who gets elected, before you show your ignorance, look at Canada's history, look at the great people who made Canada the great country it is, which is the Native Indigenous people. And let's not make the Native Indigenous people take a back seat to Canada, the country they belong in, and the country that they started. Let's give the Native Indigenous people the front seat here in Canada, and let's make their national heritage and their language Canada's first language here in Canada. And let's not forget about their heritage. They got the most beautiful heritage in the world. They really do. I remember when I was Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau's delegate when he was running for the Liberal leadership race here in Canada a few years back. I stepped up, I became his delegate. And do you know why I became his delegate? Because I seen something great in Justin Trudeau. I seen something new in Justin Trudeau, something fresh what Canada needs. I had a conversation with Justin Trudeau on the telephone when he called me when he was just a Liberal leader. He was running for the leadership race. He won. I voted him in. And over time he became Canada's Prime Minister. I mean, not too many people can say that they talked to the Prime Minister on the telephone before he became Prime Minister. I did it. I gotta say something. You know, Justin Trudeau is still fresh. He faded in the polls, something fierce, because, you know, he was making promises that wasn't realistic, and he failed most Canadians, which I understand, and I'm not going to stand in the way of the Canadians in their way they choose to vote, because that's what democracy is all about. Democracy, you vote the way you want to. Even though we got a lot of people in office that don't respect that. We had that discussion with Daryl Sampson about his assistant not respecting the way how people see things and the way how they choose to bring concerns forward. But Daryl Sampson had a chat with his office assistant in Fall River. But Canada needs to be on a better path than it's in. We have provinces falling behind the rest of Canada, like I said before. Nova Scotia's health care is falling behind the rest of Canada. And you know why it's falling behind the rest of Canada? Because we're voting the wrong people in office. Majority of the time when people run for office, they're just there for their pension. They got no sense of direction, what direction to lead our country in, lead your province in. They have no sense of direction, none whatsoever. The only thing what their focus is on getting a pension so they can retire healthy, and that's it. But you know, when I became Justin Trudeau's delegate, it was all about representing Canada as one. Let's not leave nobody left behind. Like I said before, Nova Scotia's healthcare has fallen behind. The Native Indigenous people, their national history, their heritage, their language, everything what they are is forgotten about and is left behind in the archives. Let's not leave them in the archives. Let's not make them take the back seat. Let's have the Native Indigenous people take the front seat and be Canada's #1 national heritage. Canada's second language, English. Canada's third language, French. It's the least what we can do to the Native Indigenous people for the embarrassment and the humiliation what they went through when they lost their country to Great Britain when they invaded. Let's slowly but surely give Canada back to its people, the Native Indigenous people. They stand for everything right. They stand up to Justin Trudeau with the pipeline. They stand up to Justin Trudeau with the environment. They stand up to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when things go wrong. And you look at their living environment, most of them live in. Unsafe, healthy living environments. Polluted water qualities. They don't deserve to live like that. They deserve to live better. And again, that is another sign of people like provinces here in Canada falling behind the rest of Canada. Canada has to stand stronger and better with one another side to side and not stand apart and left behind. This is what's wrong with Canada. But anyways, like I say, it was an honor being Justin Trudeau's delegate, but I feel his realistic goals wasn't realistic at all. His idea or goals were to steer Canada and wasn't realistic at all. Actually, he sounded a lot like the NDP. Will I vote Liberal again? Probably so, but it's not as strong as it was in 2015 during the federal election, but it's there. I like to go Conservative, but I'm unsure with Andrew Scheer, but never say never, because you never know how things can turn out to be. But I am going to say is I like Justin Trudeau to recognize the Native Indigenous people a lot better than how they're being recognized today. In my opinion, Justin Trudeau should owe the Native Indigenous people an apology, and let's make their heritage Canada's #1 heritage here in Canada and not left behind. But anyways, that's what I have to say about this. And I apologize to the Native Indigenous people for all the insults and the embarrassment and the humiliation that you face here in Canada. If I were Prime Minister of Canada, which I wouldn't most likely would never be because I can't speak French, very limited to it, your heritage would be #1. Your language would be Canada's #1 language and not left behind and not forgotten about. You would not be forgotten and left behind. You would always be the front and center of the attention. But anyways, that's what I have to say about this, and I thank you for watching.